Ah, nice. I'm finally done. I can finally take a break now. What am I gonna do? You know what? Let's actually watch some YouTube. Oh, Callisto has a new video. Yo! How's he flying that fast? How are you doing that? Dude, I can't believe how good Butterfly FPV flies. Like, damn. I wish I could do that. Dude, I gotta start practicing like Andrew Yap, man. Like, look at his lines. It's so clean. These pilots, they just fly so cleanly. The turns, the maneuvers, they're so fast, and I don't know, it just... You know what? It looks easy enough. I think I can do it. I have huge respect for pilots like these guys. Their flight lines are just so clean and every movement just feels like it was practiced 1,000 times to perfection. Though I've been flying whoops for over a year now and can honestly say that I've gotten a lot better, I think it's time to step up my game and finally get something that will push my limits. Starting off with what comes in the box, we do have our usual spares. The Bite & Fly includes a spare set of Gemfun 1219S tri-blade props, which I really like, and a spare V2 light canopy. The kit also has the USB cable that you connect to for configuring Betaflight, and the usual information card that you get from Betaflight if you need any help. Interestingly, the kit also includes 15 pieces of peak screws, which I believe are, M1.4 by 3mm, so pretty cool that they included these since I know pilots are constantly trying to cut down weight on these little guys. And lastly, we have the new blacked out Champion Edition Air65. The Champion Edition is similar to the standard Air65 with a few changes here and there. For one, the color scheme is different. We are rocking a Batman style setup with the dark gray Air65 frame, a black V2 light canopy, and black Gemfun 1219S props. And we all know for a fact that coolness factor is gonna boost your skills to at least 50%. That's kinda obvious. Going to the more important changes, the first is the shift to these version 2 0702 30,000 kV dual ball bearing motors. That is a lot of things to say in one take, oh my goodness. Aside from the increase in kV, these are using dual ball bearings, which definitely make these motors perform a lot smoother and quieter compared to their brass bushing counterparts. However, there is a downside to these motors, which is weight. These are slightly heavier compared to the standard blue 0702 motors by around 0.1 gram per motor. Whether that is a deal breaker to you or not, that is up to you. The Air65 Champion Edition is using BetaFPV's new 5-in-1 flight controller. Similar to the 4-in-1 flight controller on the Air75 and Air65, but with the addition of the serial ELR-S receiver built into the all-in-one, which honestly is a really nice touch, and I'm pretty sure Chris Rosser would be very happy to hear about this. Speaking about weight, the all-in-one weighs around 3.6 grams, and it's using the new STM32G473 processor paired with the ICM 42688P gyro, which so far for me has been pretty good, and several other pilots that I've talked to also really like it. Just like the 4-in-1 version that we discussed in the Air65 video, this also has 5A ESCs with BlueJ pre-installed and 16 megabytes of black box space, which is really nice. Just like BetaFPV's other Bite & Fly tiny whoops, the Air65 Champion Edition is using the CO3 camera, which personally is my favorite tiny whoop camera. This is paired with their V2 light canopy, which addresses the issue with the V1, which often sheared off the UFL connection during a crash. Rest assured, the V2, they fixed this, they just removed some material, and now it doesn't do this anymore. However, I do still urge you guys to attach your antennas more securely, or do what I like to do, which is just to make a smaller and simpler dipole antenna. Now let's move on to my initial impressions of the Air65 Champion Edition, cause honestly, there are some interesting things that I want to talk about. Okay, just as a disclaimer and to be transparent, I don't have the standard Air65 to compare this to. However, I will be discussing the difference between the two and how, in theory, the Champion Edition has an advantage over the standard Air65. Either way, both the Standard Edition and the Champion Edition honestly are great drones, and you can't get wrong with either one, and it's now just a matter of preference. Naturally, something called the Champion Edition probably focused for those who want to participate in racing, or at least those who like that racing style. Fast, agile, and precise flying. With that in mind, it's interesting that they went to heavier motors which added around 0.3 grams compared to the standard Air65. As I've mentioned, the bind and fly does include peak screws which will help with reducing weight, but I do think that assessing these motors will better help you guys decide if that weight gain is a deal breaker or an insignificant downside. Side note, some nerd stuff is about to happen, so if you want to skip this part, there are timestamps that you can move to. The standard 0702 used brass bushings to reduce friction between the rotating shaft and the stator, which is the part with the coils. This is fine for most whoops, but they will degrade over time regardless of other factors. Opening up these motors, we can see the dual ball bearings that make these motors special. This shift of using bearings instead of bushings do provide benefits when it comes to power and efficiency. In fact, BetaFPV mentioned a 12% increase in efficiency compared to their 0702s on the standard Air65, which, by the way, 12% is a significant increase. But come on, realistically, it would be very hard to quantify the difference of efficiency in real-life applications compared to just regular thrust stand data, so take that with a grain of salt. What caught my interest was that these motors are the second version of BetaFPV's dual ball bearing motors. Incidentally, I do have the first version that I bought for myself almost a year ago. The two biggest changes that I can notice is that the magnets are now curved instead of flat, and the gap between the stator and the magnets are a little less. Theoretically, these changes do improve the general performance of the motor, but if you're asking how much, you smart nugget, honestly, I don't know. But it's a neat fact to know that they are changing things to make the motor a little bit better. I think the biggest advantage of these motors is really how smooth they are, and you can definitely hear that difference after several crashes. Bushing motors may start to have a rough sound to them, which may or may not affect performance, where these dual ball bearing motors can remain smooth for a longer period of time. In fact, I've used the first version on my Hachidori XS for testing, and they still sound smooth despite the beating I've put it through in testing my frame. The first version's bearings look exactly the same as these new ones, so I'll expect them to hold up the same way. Going back to the drone as a whole, I do want to mention that if you're a beginner and you plan to fly this indoors, despite being a 65, it is extremely hard to fly in an enclosed environment. The drone comes with their light canopy angled pretty high, and those 30,000 kV motors do require a bit of training to get used to. I'm not kidding when I say that I crashed this thing so many times during my first week of testing when my hard-headedness said I wanted to fly it without doing any changes. Speaking of changes, the flights that you will see in the next portion of this video is a mix of flights that added stock camera angle with no throttle expo and flights with a lower camera angle with some throttle expo. As I've mentioned earlier, the Champion Edition is primarily for people who likes things fast. The drone itself actually has a really nice PID tune which is comparable to the PID tune on the Air65. Very little prop wash, which honestly only shows up when you force it, like bailing out of a dive. I also like the choice of using tri-blades over bi-blades, as it makes turning really smooth and that extra kV really makes the whole drone pop. I actually really enjoyed doing freestyle with the Champion Edition, mainly because of how much hang time I can get with it. Even on a slightly windy day, the Champion Edition Air65 will certainly be fun to fly outside, especially when you have the space to work with. I found myself being more comfortable doing freestyle maneuvers outside and in my first floor. And flight times, by the way, were pretty good at an average of around 2 minutes and 50 seconds on these Lava 300 mAh batteries, which honestly is longer than what I was expecting given that these motors are 30,000 kV. It was during my room flights when I kind of realized how hard it was to fly without Throttle Expo and flying at a higher camera angle that I'm used to. I know I rarely show footage of crashing, but I genuinely had a hard time at the start. But as I've mentioned at the start of this video, I wanted to push my limits and crashing is part of that process. I think the hardest part of flying was the high camera angle forcing you to fly pretty fast and the high kV motors making throttle management harder than usual. There are some ways to go around these issues which I'll mention later, but I found myself hitting things because I had too much power. It certainly is a hurdle that pilots can get over through time, but I'd say that it was harder for me than flying the Air65 indoors. I did eventually get used to flying faster and at a higher camera angle, but for you guys, I highly recommend training yourself gradually. You can start with a lower camera angle using Throttle Expo or even starting with a lowered motor output, just so you can get the basics out of the way like hovering precisely or getting some muscle memory. As you get better, you can gradually increase motor output or your camera angle to get faster and faster. I do advise to keep Throttle Expo when you get better at flying, since I think that is one of the things that will quickly help you get better at throttle control. Anyways, that is all we have for today's video. I know it's a little bit scuffed and different from my usual review, but I hope you guys still enjoyed my review of the Air65 Champion Edition. Though I am personally not yet a racing pilot, I do think that the Air65 Champion is going to be my go-to for when I practice for competitions, which I do plan to compete once I have more time. If you live in the Philippines, we do have the occasional whoop competitions, and I hope I get the pleasure of competing with you guys and having a lot of fun. Thank you again to BetaFPV for letting me review the Air65 Champion Edition. I honestly really enjoy their products and I know a lot of other pilots that do, and I will be using their new all-in-ones and motors for my own personal Hachidori builds. I believe they're also having their Black Friday promotion between November 21 and the 2nd of December, which is honestly perfect timing to get some whoop parts for the winter and holidays. As always, there will be affiliate links in the description to some of their products, and if you guys choose to use them, which by the way, no pressure, I get a small commission which helps this channel. And as always, thank you for watching this video. We recently just hit 1K subs on this channel and I genuinely can't believe it. I can't thank you guys enough, and I honestly think it's just a dream, but I've pinched myself enough to know that it's reality. I wouldn't be here without you guys, so once again, thank you for supporting me and I hope I get to see you guys in the next video.